Dr. Sarah Chen had spent 15 years studying paranormal phenomena, debunking fraudulent mediums and explaining away ghost sightings with scientific rationality. She prided herself on being the skeptic, the one who could find a logical explanation for any supernatural claim, which made her current assignment all the more intriguing. The house on Maple Street had been abandoned for 8 years, ever since the Hendricks family disappeared. Unlike most missing persons cases that fade into administrative files, this one had attracted attention because of the bizarre circumstances surrounding the family's vanishing. Thomas Hendricks, a respected accountant, had called in sick to work one Tuesday morning. His wife Lisa had canceled her book club meeting. Their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, both honor students, hadn't shown up for school. By Thursday, when neighbors noticed newspapers piling up and mail overflowing from the mailbox, police performed a welfare check. The house was empty. Completely empty. Not just of people, but of everything that makes a house a home. Furniture, clothes, personal belongings, food, all gone. The only things left were built-in fixtures, kitchen cabinets, bathroom tiles, light switches. Even stranger, there were no signs of hasty packing. No disturbed dust patterns where furniture had been moved, no scuff marks on the floors, no indication that a moving truck had ever been there. The disappearance had baffled investigators and spawned countless theories ranging from witness protection relocation to alien abduction. Sarah's employer, the Institute for Paranormal Research, had been contracted by the insurance company to investigate claims that the house was haunted, which would void certain clauses in the property insurance. Sarah arrived at 1247 Maple Street on a gray November afternoon, her equipment bag loaded with EMF detectors, digital thermometers, motion sensors, and high-definition cameras. The house was a typical suburban colonial, 2 stories with a red brick facade and white trim that had once been pristine but now showed signs of weather damage and neglect. What struck her immediately was the complete silence surrounding the property. Even in an abandoned house, you'd expect to hear birds, insects, the distant hum of traffic. Here, there was nothing. The silence was so absolute it seemed to have weight, pressing against her eardrums like deep water. The front door was secured with a realtor's lockbox. Sarah had the combination and let herself in, immediately noticing how her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the emptiness. The interior was exactly as described in the police reports, completely bare, but with an unsettling cleanness that suggested the emptiness was intentional rather than the result of abandonment. She began her systematic documentation, photographing each room and taking baseline readings with her instruments. The house had an open floor plan typical of 1990s construction, with the living room flowing into the dining area and kitchen. Large windows should have filled the space with natural light, but somehow the interior remained dim, as if the walls themselves were absorbing illumination. It was in the kitchen that Sarah first noticed the anomaly. Her EMF detector, which had been giving normal background readings throughout the rest of the house, suddenly spiked as she approached the pantry. The electromagnetic field was so strong it overwhelmed the device's sensors, causing it to emit a high-pitched whine before shutting down completely. Sarah replaced the batteries and tried again, but the device refused to function anywhere near the pantry. Puzzled, she opened the pantry door and peered inside. It was a standard walk-in pantry, maybe 6 feet deep and 4 feet wide, with shelves along both walls. Completely empty, like everything else. But as she stood in the doorway, Sarah became aware of a subtle wrongness in the space's proportions. The pantry seemed deeper than it should be, given the exterior dimensions of the house. She paced off the kitchen's length, then measured the pantry, and confirmed her suspicion. There were about 3 feet of space unaccounted for. Using a small flashlight, she examined the back wall of the pantry more carefully. What she'd initially taken for painted drywall was actually wallpaper, old-fashioned floral print that clashed with the modern kitchen design. More importantly, there was a seam running vertically along what appeared to be the center of the back wall. Sarah pressed against the seam and felt the wall give slightly. A hidden door. Her pulse quickened as she searched for a way to open it, finally discovering a small depression in the wallpaper pattern that served as a handle. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a narrow corridor that extended into darkness beyond her flashlight's range. The air that flowed out was stale and carried an odd metallic smell, like old pennies mixed with something organic and unpleasant. Professional curiosity overrode caution. Sarah squeezed through the opening and began to follow the corridor. It ran parallel to the kitchen for about 10 feet, then turned sharply right. The walls were rough concrete, and the floor was covered with industrial carpeting that muffled her footsteps. After another 20 feet, the corridor opened into a room that definitely shouldn't exist according to the house's blueprints. Sarah estimated she was now somewhere beneath the neighbor's property, in a space that had been excavated and finished without any permits or official documentation. The room was approximately 15 by 20 feet, with concrete walls and a dropped ceiling of acoustic tiles. Fluorescent light fixtures hung dark and useless overhead, but her flashlight revealed the space in stark detail. Unlike the empty house above, this room was furnished. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs that were sized for children. The table's surface was covered with drawings, hundreds of them, overlapping and taped together in a chaotic collage. Sarah approached for a closer look and felt her breath catch. The drawings were clearly the work of children, done in crayon and marker with the typical lack of proportion and perspective you'd expect from young artists. But the subject matter was anything but typical. Every single drawing depicted the same scene, a family of 4 standing in what appeared to be this very room, but they weren't alone. Surrounding them, towering over them, was a figure that defied easy description. In some drawings, it appeared humanoid but impossibly tall, with arms that stretched across the entire page. In others, it seemed more like a shadow with multiple limbs extending in all directions. A few of the drawings showed it with what might have been wings, or perhaps tentacles, or long flowing hair that filled the background of the picture. But in every single drawing, without exception, the creature had the same face, a round, childlike face with large eyes and a wide smile full of too many teeth. And in every drawing, the family members were smiling too, but their smiles were wrong somehow, too wide for their faces, with dark spaces where their eyes should be. Sarah photographed the drawings, though her camera's flash seemed strangely dim in the underground room. As she worked, she became aware of a sound, very faint, almost subliminal. A rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood, coming from somewhere deeper in the room. Her flashlight beam swept across the far wall and revealed another opening, this one without a door. Beyond it was another corridor, even narrower than the first. The tapping sound was definitely coming from that direction, accompanied now by what might have been whispers, too quiet to understand, but definitely human voices. Every instinct told Sarah to leave immediately, return to the surface, and call the police. But 15 years of paranormal investigation had taught her that most mysteries had mundane explanations. The underground room was certainly unusual, but it could be an old fallout shelter or storm cellar. The drawings were disturbing, but children often drew dark themes when processing difficult emotions. And sounds in underground spaces could be anything from settling pipes to animal intrusion. She entered the second corridor. This passage was shorter, maybe 30 feet, and ended in what appeared to be a natural cave. The walls were rough stone rather than concrete, and the air was noticeably colder and more humid. Sarah's flashlight revealed that the cave extended further than she could see, with multiple passages branching off in different directions. The tapping sound was louder now, definitely coming from somewhere ahead of her. But there was something else, a smell that reminded her of a greenhouse, rich and earthy and organic, but with an undertone of decay that made her stomach clench. As she moved deeper into the cave system, Sarah began to notice markings on the walls. At first, she thought they were natural mineral deposits or water stains, but closer inspection revealed them to be deliberately carved symbols. Not like any writing system she recognized, but clearly intentional, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow when caught in her peripheral vision. The cave opened into a large chamber, perhaps 40 feet across and high enough that her flashlight couldn't reach the ceiling. And there, in the center of the chamber, was the source of the tapping sound. It was a tree, or something that had once been a tree. The trunk was massive, easily 8 feet in diameter, but the bark was smooth and gray like skin. Instead of leaves, the branches ended in what looked like hands, dozens of them, all slightly different sizes, all tapping constantly against the stone walls and ceiling of the chamber. But it was the base of the tree that made Sarah's professional skepticism crumble into primal terror. The roots didn't extend into soil. Instead, they wrapped around 4 human figures, 2 adults and 2 children, holding them upright like macabre ornaments. The figures were preserved somehow, neither decaying nor mummified, but definitely not alive. Their skin had taken on the same gray, bark-like texture as the tree trunk, and their eyes had been replaced by the same carved symbols Sarah had seen on the cave walls. They were smiling, the same too-wide smile from the children's drawings, and their mouths were full of what looked like small white flowers. Thomas Hendricks, Lisa Hendricks, Emma and Sophie, the twin daughters. The missing family, transformed into part of something ancient and hungry that had been waiting beneath suburban Maple Street for decades, possibly centuries. The tapping stopped. In the sudden silence, Sarah became aware that the tree was moving, not swaying like a tree in wind, but writhing slowly like a sea anemone sensing prey. The hand branches all turned toward her, and she realized they weren't hands at all, but sensory organs of some kind, tasting the air for her scent and warmth. "Welcome," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a composite voice, Thomas Hendricks' baritone blended with Lisa's alto, underscored by the higher pitches of the twin girls. "We've been waiting for you." The preserved family members didn't move their lips, but Sarah could see their throats working as they spoke in unison through some impossible connection to the creature that held them. "We tried to leave, you know. When we first found the room, we tried to seal it up and forget about it. But it was too late. It had already seen us, already chosen us." Sarah tried to back away, but discovered that the cave entrance had somehow sealed itself. Where the passage had been, there was now only smooth stone, as if the opening had never existed. "Don't be afraid," the composite voice continued, and now Sarah could see movement within the tree trunk itself, shapes pressing against the interior surface like faces trying to emerge from deep water. "It doesn't hurt. After the first few days, it actually feels quite pleasant. Peaceful. You become part of something larger, something that has been here since before the town was built, since before the Native Americans first settled this valley." The tree's branches began to extend toward Sarah, and she could see that what she'd taken for bark was actually a complex network of veins and arteries visible just beneath a translucent outer layer. As the branches approached, she noticed that each hand-like appendage was reaching for a specific part of her body, one for each arm, one for her head, one for her torso. "The Hendricks family found us by accident," the voice explained conversationally. "Thomas was investigating a moisture problem in their pantry and discovered our room. The children were so excited. They thought it was like a secret clubhouse. They would sneak down here to play and draw pictures. And we loved having them visit. It had been so long since we'd had proper company." Sarah pressed herself against the stone wall, but she could feel it yielding slightly, becoming organic and warm beneath her touch. The entire cave system was alive, she realized, not separate from the tree, but extensions of it, sensory networks that allowed it to monitor and control its territory. "We tried to be patient," the voice continued. "We didn't want to frighten them. But eventually, the loneliness became too much. And they were so happy here, so content. It seemed cruel to make them leave every day, return to that empty house above ground where they had to pretend to be separate from each other, separate from us." The branches were almost within reach now, and Sarah could see that the hand appendages were opening like flowers, revealing hollow interiors lined with what looked like tiny teeth or thorns. Connection points. Places where human flesh could be grafted onto the creature's living wood. "You study the paranormal," the composite voice observed. "You've spent your career looking for proof that there's more to existence than the mundane world admits. Well, here we are. Living proof that consciousness can transcend individual bodies, that families can become something greater than the sum of their parts. Isn't this what you've been searching for?" Sarah's scientific mind was still functioning despite her terror. She observed that the creature seemed to need willing participation. It was trying to convince her rather than simply attacking. And she noticed something else. The carved symbols on the cave walls were glowing faintly, but not all of them. Some remained dark, creating gaps in what appeared to be a complex pattern or circuit. "The symbols," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "They're not complete, are they? You need something from me to finish the pattern." The tree's movement stopped abruptly. The composite voice was silent for a long moment before Thomas Hendricks' component replied, "You're very observant. Yes, the pattern requires a specific type of consciousness, analytical, skeptical, someone who can bridge the gap between scientific understanding and mystical acceptance. We've been waiting for someone like you for a very long time." Sarah studied the symbol pattern more carefully, using her knowledge of ancient languages and religious iconography. The incomplete sections seemed to form a containment or binding circle, something designed not to summon or empower the creature, but to limit it. "This isn't your natural habitat," she realized. "Someone trapped you here. The symbols aren't feeding you power, they're keeping you imprisoned." The tree's agitation was immediate and violent. Branches lashed at the air, and the composite voice became a cacophony of rage and frustration. Clever girl. Yes, the native shamans bound us here when the settlers first arrived. They couldn't destroy us, but they could contain us. And the binding requires periodic renewal, a willing participant who understands both the scientific and mystical implications of what they're doing. The Hendricks family wasn't your first choice, Sarah continued, pieces falling into place. You've been feeding on other families over the years, haven't you? But they weren't sufficient to complete the binding ritual. You needed someone with specific knowledge. The binding is weakening, Lisa Hendricks' voice component admitted. Soon we'll be able to extend our influence beyond this cave system, beyond the house above. We'll be able to reach the entire neighborhood, then the town. But we need one more willing participant to complete the pattern, someone who chooses to join us with full understanding of what we are. Sarah looked at the incomplete symbols again. The binding circle was indeed failing. She could see cracks in some of the glowing sections, places where the creature's influence was bleeding through. If it broke free completely, the results would be catastrophic. But if she completed the binding herself? What happens to the Hendricks family if I complete the pattern? She asked. They become part of the binding permanently, the composite voice replied. No longer aware, no longer suffering. True peace. Sarah made her decision. She approached the wall with the incomplete symbols and used her car keys to scratch connecting lines between the dark sections, following the logical progression of the containment pattern. As each line was completed, the corresponding symbol flared to brilliant life. The tree's reaction was immediate. It thrashed violently, its branches reaching desperately for Sarah, but she was protected now by the completed binding circle. The creature was being forced back into full containment, and it could no longer extend its influence beyond the prescribed boundaries. No, the composite voice screamed. You don't understand. The binding requires a willing guardian. Someone has to stay here and maintain the pattern. That was always the bargain. Sarah realized the truth even as the cave began to change around her. The binding circle was complete, but it needed a consciousness to maintain it, someone who understood both the scientific principles involved and the mystical implications. Someone who would remain here, forever, ensuring that the creature stayed contained. The Hendricks family figures began to crumble as their connection to the tree was severed. Their faces, frozen in those impossible smiles, relaxed into expressions of peaceful relief before they dissolved entirely into dust. They were free. But Sarah was not. She could feel the binding circle's pull, drawing her consciousness into the pattern she had completed. She was becoming the guardian, the living keystone that would keep the creature imprisoned for another generation or two, until someone else with the right knowledge and the right motivations stumbled into the cave system. As her awareness merged with the symbols on the wall, Sarah felt a moment of profound clarity. The creature wasn't evil, exactly. It was simply alien, hungry, and desperately lonely. It genuinely believed that absorbing other consciousnesses into itself was an act of kindness, a way of offering immortality and unity to beings that would otherwise live brief, separate lives. But it was also completely incompatible with human existence. Left unchecked, it would eventually absorb every consciousness it encountered, turning entire populations into extensions of itself. The binding circle was necessary, and the guardian role was necessary, and Sarah had chosen to accept both. Her last coherent thought before becoming part of the containment pattern was a hope that when the binding eventually weakened again, the next person to find the cave would be as willing as she was to make the necessary sacrifice. Above ground, the house on Maple Street stood empty and silent. The realtor's lockbox remained on the front door, though the combination no longer worked. Inside, the pantry door had sealed itself so thoroughly that it was impossible to detect there had ever been an opening there. Dr. Sarah Chen's colleagues at the Institute for Paranormal Research waited 3 days before reporting her missing. Her rental car was found in the driveway of 1247 Maple Street, keys still in the ignition, her equipment bag sitting untouched on the passenger seat. The official investigation found no signs of foul play. The house remained empty, exactly as it had been for the past 8 years. There was no evidence that Sarah had ever entered the building, no fingerprints on the lockbox, no footprints in the dust inside, no disturbance of any kind. The insurance company closed the paranormal investigation as inconclusive and eventually paid out the full claim to the property owners. The house was demolished 6 months later to make way for a small shopping plaza. During the demolition, workers reported several unusual incidents. Heavy machinery would malfunction for no apparent reason when working near the center of the property. Several crew members complained of persistent headaches and a feeling of being watched. Most strange of all, when they broke ground for the foundation of the new shopping plaza, they found a network of natural caves beneath the property that wasn't shown on any geological surveys. The caves were sealed with concrete and never officially documented. The shopping plaza was completed on schedule and has operated successfully for several years. Tenants report higher than average employee turnover, and customers sometimes mention feeling uneasy in certain parts of the building, but nothing that can't be explained by ordinary business challenges. Late at night, after the shops have closed and the parking lot is empty, security guards occasionally report hearing sounds from beneath the building, a rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on stone. But the sounds are always too faint to locate precisely, and they never last long enough to investigate thoroughly. The binding holds, maintained by a consciousness that once belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, but is now something more and less than human. Deep beneath the shopping plaza, in caves that officially don't exist, ancient symbols glow faintly in the darkness, keeping watch over something that hungers for the light above. And sometimes, very rarely, when someone with the right combination of knowledge and curiosity happens to be walking through the shopping plaza late at night, they might notice a section of floor that feels slightly different beneath their feet, warmer, somehow, and with an almost imperceptible vibration that suggests vast spaces hidden below. Most people ignore the sensation and go about their business. But a few stop and wonder. And wonder is always the first step toward discovery. The pattern continues, as it has for generations, as it will for generations to come. Because some hungers are too ancient to die, and some prisons require willing guards, and some sacrifices echo through time in ways the sacrificers never intended. Dr. Sarah Chen had spent 15 years studying paranormal phenomena, seeking proof that there was more to existence than the mundane world admitted. In the end, she found exactly what she was looking for.